Welcome back, everybody, to Constructive Uncoupling, the podcast devoted to amicable divorces. I'm your host, Judy Weigel, your amicable divorce expert. Why? Because that's all I do, amicable divorces. Today's topic is co-parenting with a drug addict. Almost mission impossible. It can't be done until the person is helped, is sober, has gotten everything under control. You simply can't co-parent. Let me start with some statistics. More than 24 million Americans are addicted to drugs and alcohol. 41% of those first marriages end in divorce. 60% of those second marriages end in divorce. And this is a phenomenal statistic. 73% of those third marriages end in divorce. In America, there occurs one divorce approximately every 36 seconds. That's nearly 2,400 divorces per day, 16,800 divorces per week, and 876,000 divorces every single year. The average length of a marriage that ends in divorce is about 8 years long. And you know what? My marriage was 8 years long and it ended in divorce. But that is an absolutely astounding statistic. And let me just give you a few more before we get into the topic. Over 20 million Americans over the age of 12 have an addiction, excluding tobacco. 100 people die every day from drug overdoses, and this rate has tripled in the past 20 years. 9.4 million people in 2011 reported driving under the influence of illicit drugs. 6.8 million people with an addiction also have a mental illness. Rates of illicit drug use is highest among those 18 to 25 years old, and over 90% of those with an addiction begin drinking, smoking, or using illicit drugs before the age of 18. This really has to have us step up and take notice, but we're going to focus on, though, co-parenting with somebody who has a drug addiction issue, another parent that is. So, let's set the stage. You're filing for divorce, you have children, and now you have to start the paperwork to initiate the divorce, and the main document is a petition. You have to state on the petition in the custody section for children whether you want joint or sole custody. So let me define custody, because custody does not have a percentage attached to it. And this is what really confuses people. Custody is a category of decision making, and with that decision making there come responsibilities. Custody can either be sole or joint, meaning sole responsibility of decision making with, if that's what you're going for, sole custody. And if you want joint custody, it means you both are going to participate in decision making. Now, we have two levels of custody. We have physical custody, at least this is in California. We have physical custody and we have legal custody. So physical custody has to do with making decisions surrounding where the children live, where they can move to, meaning out of the county or out of the state. And if sole custody, that parent determines the co-parenting schedule. Legal custody has to do with decisions surrounding how the child is educated, how the child is brought up culturally and religiously. Visitation, on the other hand, has to do with percentages of time that the child is with each parent. So even if you choose sole physical and legal custody, which quite often happens when there is drug addiction in one of the parents, so even if you choose sole custody, you can allow visitation to the other parent. But there are a lot of rules that are attached to this, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So be careful how you complete the petition in regard to selecting sole versus joint custody and the rights for your spouse, if your spouse is addicted to drugs, to be with a child. The way you state your wishes for custody and visitation for yourself and the addicted parent can factor into a messy situation if you're inclined to share joint custody and joint visitation with your addicted spouse, simply because you don't want to hurt him or her. Now, this is really important. I have seen people who come into the office ready to file, and they easily talk about which parent is addicted to drugs, and they talk about what the drugs are lots of times. And then they put joint custody on their petition. Now, because I'm not an attorney, I'm a legal document assistant and a mediator. A legal document assistant, by the way, allows me to file for amicable divorces. I'm not allowed to give them guidance or instruction on how to fill it out. I literally have to simply take their decisions and put them on the forms and file them for them. This is why you absolutely need an attorney to give you legal advice. When you're in the situation of being married to an addicted spouse, you really need to talk to an attorney, because the decisions you make on the petition may come back to haunt you later on in the divorce. People don't get legal advice a lot of times because they don't want to be confronted with the reality of what their choices should be. And if you have a spouse who is a parent who truly is using serious drugs, a lot more than marijuana, although that falls into the same category, and you choose joint custody because you want it to be smooth, or because you really don't want to accept that this will affect the co-parenting, or maybe you choose joint custody because your priority is simply wanting to get divorced and you want to make things as smooth as possible, so you're going to choose the decisions that make the other spouse comfortable, and you want to have the most amicable divorce. But bear in mind that drug addiction unchecked will come back to haunt and hurt the entire family. And so this is where you, as the parent who is not addicted, you really have to step up and do some tough love. And I've seen so many parents wish that their spouse wasn't addicted, and they almost want to believe the ideal in their head rather than the reality in front of them. So they go ahead and check joint physical custody, joint legal custody, or even maybe just one. They'll choose joint legal but sole physical. You really do need to talk to an attorney. And I do understand you may be getting your addicted spouse upset, but really the best interest of the children is what has to be the priority. And maybe you can't have what is called an amicable divorce and use somebody like me. Maybe you really do have to use an attorney. But you're protecting your children, and that has to be foremost. You know, just saying the phrase co-parenting with an addict, to me, it sounds so harsh. My heart goes out to anyone who has a substance abuse problem. But since addiction is a severe enough problem to potentially hurt the children, it has to be addressed, and even in the most severe way, which may mean sole custody until the parent gets help. And so let's explore this further. It's incumbent upon the parent who is not addicted to advance the rules for co-parenting and visitation so that the children aren't harmed. There is always the danger that the addict will be disconnected from good decision-making when they're with the children, potentially leading to bodily harm, even death for the child. I mean, I can't present this seriously enough to you, that when there are children involved, you really have to get tough with the other parent. You have to protect the children. If the non-addictive parent doesn't exercise control over when and how the addicted parent is with the children, and harm comes to the children, do you know that the children can be taken away from both of you? That's right. Because it's incumbent upon the non-addicted parent to use sound judgment and to not put the children in harm's way. So if the non-addictive parent wants to be the good guy as far as the divorce is concerned and allow the addictive parent who says they're not using drugs, and you really know when they are, you know the changes in behavior. Do you know that Child Protective Services can come in? That's the agency that will take your children away. And I've had a couple recently, it happened to them. She wanted to be a good person, make a smooth divorce. She put joint custody, and lo and behold, an episode happened, and Child Protective Services came in and said, nobody's making any good decisions now. We will take your child, and we will then go through, oh my God, all of the ramifications that happen with Child Protective Services. Both parents are evaluated, their home life is evaluated, people they know are brought in and questioned, the children are eventually questioned. It's horrible. And you're opening up a can of worms that will potentially hurt the children even more psychologically. So the non-addictive parent is relied upon to make good decisions for the best interest of the children, not the best interest of the addicted parent. The incentive for the addictive parent in a co-parenting schedule is a step-up plan that starts visitation in a restricted manner. Small amounts of time with the children at the other parent's house or in public with the other parent, given the parent isn't high, the addicted parent isn't high. Then you can step up to time with the children with a professional visitation monitor. You can then step up to time alone with the children, and now the hopefully sober parent is there and ready. And this would be in the written settlement agreement for the divorce and enforceable by the court and the local police if the children ended up being in physical danger and help was needed to get them if the addicted parent kind of fell off the wagon. So when you're dealing with a co-parenting schedule and you pretty much know that the other parent is using drugs, you have to create a visitation schedule in order to complete your settlement agreement in the divorce. And so that's where the step-up plans are really invaluable, because it gives the parent, the addictive parent, hope that if they can get help, if they go on a program, if their intention and their behavior really does change their course of addiction, they absolutely can be with the children. And so the step-up plan really is, it's 3 levels of hope. A, no, you have to be under serious monitoring, generally by the other parent, and you come over to their house. And then when you see sobriety being consistent, then you can have a visitation monitor. And then eventually you can have the parent who's now sober be with the children. So another important factor of what goes into the settlement agreement, if you're having a step-up plan, is the drug testing. There has to be language about drug testing in the settlement agreement. And so it can be like this. It can be where the drug testing is taking place, the number of times per week or per month, the type of drug testing, because there's various types. You know, there's urine, there's hair, and now marijuana has its own testing, and the results have to be shared with the other parent. And you have to allow the parent who's not addictive to call the shots on drug testing. That parent has to be assured that you are getting healthy, the addictive parent, and the kids aren't in any danger. One thing I want to say about marijuana testing. So legalized marijuana recreationally is in California as in many other states. And people come into the office and we're mediating and we're talking about the use of marijuana. And people think there's no testing when you're driving. People think you can drive on it. And this is absolutely not true. I go to a lot of seminars now with the bar associations, and we're talking about testing. So just like there's apparatus to test for alcohol when you're driving, there's apparatus to test for marijuana now when you're driving. The vaping, no. Even if you're using marijuana because you have a physical ailment, you can't drive and do it because it really does change your reality perspective. Let me go back now and define monitored visitation. What is monitored visitation? Well, it's not your housekeeper. I've seen that too often. People don't want to go through what you have to do to get a professional visitation monitor, but you have to do it. This is important. This is your children. So I've seen people use relatives, use their housekeepers, who, by the way, sometimes don't speak English as fluently as they should. It just happens to be that way in Los Angeles. You have to have a person who's listed as a professional monitor who attends the visitations between the parent and the child, to document the visit with the addicted parent in terms of behavior and what that parent did with the children, and to provide oversight so that no harm comes to the child during the visit, and even to prevent child abduction. So we hear all these horror stories on the news now. There's a divorce, one parent takes the child, doesn't return, child abduction, and quite often a lot of harm comes to the children. When you're on drugs, you're desperate. And so child abduction can be a real serious consideration in these relationships. So giving hope and incentive to the addictive parent through a step-up plan will really not be the deciding factor in the addict getting help. The deciding factor will be the self-commitment of the addict to seek help. Externally, the step-up plan is there to be a reward for internally choosing help. But I haven't seen the step-up plan be the top incentive because it's external and not internal. So you know for yourself whether you want to go on a diet and lose weight, whether you want to make yourself physically fit. You have to have internal reasons for doing it. Nobody can present to you an external reason, and that can be your motivation and incentive. So let me tell you a story. Two absolutely lovely people were here in the office for a mediation. Husband was seriously addicted. Unfortunately, the husband had a long history of addiction. I think they're only in their 30s, but they have 2 children. And they really want to do the right thing by their children. So initially, when the petition was filed, he was the petitioner, and it was filled out for joint physical and legal custody with visitation to both. I, even though I'm not allowed to guide and influence when people are giving me their answers for the petition for custody, I had no idea that he had an addiction problem. And she was very typical. He was sober for a certain amount of time. She had a lot of hope that this was going to stick. She wanted a very amicable divorce, and so she was going to go along with it. She wasn't accepting the reality that drug addiction is lifelong. She had known him long enough to see him go in and out of using drugs. But because a divorce was being filed for, she wanted to cling to the most hopeful part of it, and that is he had his addiction under control. He wanted to be with the children. He was going to be with them alone, and that was going to be the incentive for him to be clean. And then she saw him reacting to the emotion of divorce. Now, on a good day, and for those of us who aren't addicted, It is an enormously emotional situation going through divorce. Now, you place that on somebody who has addiction issues, it's going to bring the addiction out. Unless they have been sober for so long and been through other daunting emotional experiences, it's going to come back. And that's going to be the escape. Excuse me a minute. Oh, coughing is such an issue when you're doing these recordings. I'm back. He started using, she saw, she filed a response and put sole legal and physical custody. And then we met with a therapist in the office and me, the mediator, and we tried to work on a step-up plan. We tried to explain to him that he wasn't being punished. Everybody was there to support and help him, but this was truly in the children's best interest. He became so upset over the fact that we were discussing it that he just checked out. And that's it. So she's going to move forward on her own. She absolutely had to get legal advice so she knew what was ahead. He's okay with her finishing the divorce and having sole legal and physical custody, so that's good. He actually understands the danger. But he said to her, I want to use drugs. He actually said it. And there's nowhere to go from there. Now let me give you another example with a couple where it was complete denial. So I had another couple come in the office a couple years ago, and he had had an accident when he was younger, moving furniture. Back pain, started on prescription drugs, just like the other gentleman, started on prescription drugs. And you know what this is like. We know from Rush Limbaugh and the OxyContin, that was one of the biggest stories with a celebrity that made us aware of OxyContin and other prescription drugs. And now we know we have an opioid crisis in this country. But he had to take prescription drugs. That led into alcohol, and then marijuana was medically approved in California, then went into recreationally approved. Now they're getting a divorce and they have 2 children. But he was in complete denial. She even gave examples of what, because they were still living together, they hadn't moved out yet. There weren't 2 households. And so she was really giving examples of a weekend where she had slipped and hurt her back. So she was in bed. Something had happened to her. She was in bed, and he was in charge of the children. And he was drinking and smoking marijuana, but in the house, not driving. Okay, legal. But her point was this: what if you had to drive me to the hospital? What if you had to take care of the children? Or what if you had to take care of the children while a paramedic was called? You couldn't make decisions. You're the only parent now. I can't do anything, and you can't make decisions. And he absolutely wouldn't allow that. He put himself in a position of not making good decisions. Look, anybody who's had a couple cocktails and that was enough to change their reality perception, and you're at a party, I mean, that alone tells you that our decision-making capability is changed when our reality is changed. And now let me give you the third and the most tragic situation. A couple came to the office to start filing. He was the petitioner, she was the respondent. He filed for joint legal and physical custody with visitation to both of them. Somehow it came out in the conversation, though, that she was in the program. She has been addicted to very, very, very serious drugs. Yet he was doing joint legal and physical custody. And again, this is where I, as a legal document assistant, cannot do anything. I just encourage people to please get legal advice. When the issue of drug addiction is brought up at all, I just say, please get legal advice. In case something happens, you both need to know what's in store. Half the time people don't do it. They actually think they're being disloyal by going to see an attorney. And you're not. You're doing the best thing for yourselves and your children, because I really don't think any parent wants anything to happen to their children. They just can't see that they could be the cause of it. There's somehow a disconnect, and it's amazing that there is. So anyway, back to this last couple. I looked at her and I simply didn't believe she wasn't using, because you can tell. There's a look. If you're using, there is a look. Your face is flushed. Just the look of your eyes is just different than when you're clean and not using. They had 4 children. The 4th child was 1 month old, and they were all living with the father because she was so abusive. I mean, physically abusive to herself, taking drugs. She had no idea she was pregnant. Didn't know until it was time for the baby to be born. So he took all of the kids so that she wouldn't have, I guess, that extra pressure of 4 children while she's trying to be clean. And she was in an up and down situation. She did have a job. So she was providing for herself, but she couldn't have the children live with her yet. There was visitation granted to her. Unfortunately, the 4th child died. SIDS. I'm sure it was complications due to prenatal drugs being used. She didn't know she was pregnant. If that wasn't bad enough, they heal. Everything was put on hold, obviously, because it takes your entire life to heal from a child dying. But at least in the present moment, months had to be taken to heal. Now they're ready to join the process again. They come back to the office for another meeting, and I looked at her, and I just thought, oh, she's got to be using. The look on her face, to me, was even worse than the first time we met. And then I got the call several months later. She had overdosed. Tragic. Drug addiction is a lifelong experience. Sobriety is a day-to-day commitment. And you can never be too careful. Your children, when they are old enough, need to be told about drug addiction. So you have Al-Anon is the company, the other program you can join when you have a parent on alcohol and then drugs. The family can go to Al-Anon or other programs to teach you about certain drugs. The kids have to be educated as well. So no fooling around about drug addiction. It's very, very serious. If there are no children involved, it's hard enough getting divorced from an addicted spouse. But when there are children involved, the kids come first. And you are being nice as the non-addictive parent by being strict with the addicted parent. So in conclusion, here are the steps to follow when divorce is imminent and co-parenting is part of the divorce. Get legal advice that addresses drug addiction and co-parenting. You can't get enough education, but definitely get legal advice. You need to learn the lay of the land and what could potentially happen if you don't approach this the right way from the beginning. Be careful how you choose custody and visitation on the petition. It will either support or hurt you as you're going through the divorce. Address addiction immediately with a drug testing plan, and you will know right from the start where that drug addicted spouse sits on wanting to be healthy. They will either avoid it or embrace it. And if they want to be healthy, there will be no issue getting drug tested. They'll be proud of the fact that they're passing the test. a drug addicted parent who doesn't want to go through testing, it really means that they're not ready to give up the drugs. That's just what it means. Choose a professional visitation monitor who the addicted parent actually likes, gets along with, feels comfortable with, knows they're being taken care of, and can professionally document the session. And don't ignore the problem. It won't go away. I hope this was helpful to all of you dealing with this situation. I really appreciate that you have joined me again for this episode. This is Judy Weigel, your host for Constructive Uncoupling. You can find me in Los Angeles, Judy at divorceresourceinc.com if you want to contact me. Judy, Judy, at divorceresourceinc.com. I look forward to talking to you on my next podcast, and I really hope this was helpful. Take care.